China owns $800 billion of U.S. debt. The United States, as the borrower, has to pay interest for the money it borrows, which means that you and I and everybody else gets to pay taxes every year, where they don't fund our roads or schools or hospitals. It's money that the United States government collects and sends to Beijing to pay interest on the debt, and the Chinese use to develop the Red Army.
Richard Wolff has come out and showed how China in effect owns America. In this video, we'll show how much of American taxes are actually going to the Chinese, and are they using this money to build the infamous Red Army? In order to understand how China is getting paid by US taxes, you have to understand America's debt situation first. Spoiler alert, it's not good.
The level of debt of the country, unprecedented. The level of debt of corporations, unprecedented. Level of debt of households, about to go back to the unprecedented level it was. The American government is the most indebted government on this planet. We are #1 debtor country.
Wolff is not lying, but there is a catch. Let's ask ChatGPT, which of course is always 100% reliable. Not really, but with these questions it's pretty accurate. Who's the most indebted government in the world in absolute terms? It says, as of the most recent data, the United States government is the most indebted in the world in absolute terms. The US national debt is over 34 trillion USD. The contributing factors are persistent budget deficits, large military, and interest on existing debt. So it's true, the country with the most debt in the world is the great United States of America. More debt than any nation that you can think of. Now it's important to note that this is measured on a pure absolute figure. It's #1 in absolute terms, but the USA is not #1 if you look at things with a debt to GDP measurement. If you look at debt to GDP, it's the 8th worst. It's right up there alongside countries like the Great Sudan, Japan, Greece, and the Maldives. Not exactly economic role models for fiscal prudence.
I know this is difficult for people to hear. This is an economy that is indeed, we have the greatest level of corporate debt this country has ever seen, off the chart. The greatest level of personal debt, and we have the greatest level of government debt. Our government debt is now trillions of dollars greater than our annual output. That was not the case in the 20th century. It is the case now.
The way debt works, as I'm sure you know, is you have to pay the money back, plus you have to pay interest to the people who gave you the money. And this is where things get interesting. Who are the people that gave the US government all of this money in the first place? One of the major groups who own the massive $36 trillion worth of government debt is foreign investors, countries outside of the USA. Who are these foreign investors? The largest foreign owner is Japan, and the second largest is, lo and behold, China. China owns $768 billion worth of American debt. It turns out that Richard Wolff is right on this.
You should be aware that the United States is the world's largest debtor country. That is, we owe more money to other countries than any other country on this planet. And you might find it amusing to know that the largest single lender to the United States for most of the last 25 years has been the People's Republic of China. Think about it. The world's richest capitalist country in hock up to its nose in debt, and the leading creditor is that Communist Party-run society in China.
So $768 billion that China owns of American debt. What exactly does this mean? With debts, you don't just get it for free. You have to pay interest on the debt. That is the only reason why someone will give you money in the first place. It is estimated that the interest rate expense on that debt is 3.2%. That is up from the 1.6% rate that it was in 2021. Let's get out our calculator. 3.2% of $768 billion is $24 billion that the US government is paying directly to China in just yearly interest payments. No, that's not paying off the debt. That is just the interest, which China is basically getting each year for free. Wolff says they are using this money to build the Red Army. I'm going to investigate this a bit later in the video to see how true that may be.
Another statistic very rarely explained to the American people, that roughly 40%, the largest single chunk of stocks traded on the the American Stock Exchange, the New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ, and so on. 40% of stocks in this country are owned by foreigners, and that includes the People's Republic of China. The ability of foreigners, if the United States frightens or threatens them to disrupt the American economy, is overwhelming. And the notion that we are not at risk in this world is an attempt by the people who run this system to avoid the growing awareness that I'm trying to correct about what it means when your economy is in decline. The Chinese are very worried that the United States, as it ratchets up its Cold War rhetoric against the Chinese, may be tempted to do something about not repaying the debt it has that the Chinese own. Would be an unbelievably short-sighted act, very close to a declaration of war. I mean, military war. So it's not an immediate situation, but it's not a long-term tenable arrangement.
As you can see, the Chinese are worried that America might not repay this money. But why would the Chinese be worried about this? This is America that we're talking about, not Zimbabwe. They're the reserve currency of the world, the epicenter of finance. Uncle Sam always pays his debts to the last penny, right? Well, this debt is becoming a big problem for America, and this graph might give you a clue why. Can you see it? One of the jobs of the American government is to look after its people, help them with financial support when they're retired, protect them with defense, provide them with healthcare, deliver income security. All of these are considered ethical ways for a government to spend its money. What is not the best way for a government to spend its money is by paying interest on the debt it owes. I'll remind you again, that's not paying off the debt, that's just the interest. Net interest was the second largest payment to date for the federal government. That means they paid more for this than they did Medicare, national defense, income security, or veterans benefits and services, which is crazy the more you think about it.
The country's going bankrupt. I mean, it's really astounding that the interest payments alone on the national debt exceed the Defense Department budget, which is shocking because we spend a lot of money on defense. And if that just keeps going, we're essentially going to bankrupt the country.
So it's fair to say that the government is in big trouble with the way they are spending their money. But where do they get their money from? That money that they get to pay the interest comes, of course, from the American taxpayer. You. It doesn't just grow on trees. The government doesn't earn it, it takes it. The average American works a job and a portion of their income they must pay as tax to the government. The government then gets this money and uses it to pay the interest to the people who own its debt. One of the large owners of this debt is the People's Republic of China, which of course you and I know what this means.
Of course, the United States, as the borrower, has to pay interest for the money it borrows, which means that you and I and everybody else gets to pay taxes every year that go to Washington, where they don't fund our roads or schools or hospitals. It's money that the United States government collects and sends to Beijing to pay interest on the debt.
Every year, the United States government has to collect from its people the taxes needed to pay interest on that debt to the Chinese Communist Party. If you assume a rough interest rate in the neighborhood of 4% on $1.5 trillion, right, then it means that $60 billion of the taxes you and I pay are collected by Washington and forwarded to China, I don't know, perhaps to build up their military.
To develop the Red Army.
Wait, what? The Chinese are using the interest they receive on the American debt to fund their military? It's bad enough that they're getting a portion of the American taxpayers' money, but using it to fund the military? Surely this cannot be true. Before we get into the Red Army, I want to talk to you about an important topic, and that is how the United States of America is ensuring national security. One of the keys to national security is developing your own materials. Without this, you're reliant on other countries for key resources. That's why President Trump has signed signed several historic executive orders to protect copper production and mining on US soil. Copper is often called the new oil, and people say it's at the heart of America's future. Global mine production of this metal is expected to peak in 2026 with a projected 700,000 ton deficit in 2025 alone. For these reasons, you have key administrative figures saying things like,
American industries depend on copper and they should be made in America. No exemptions, no exceptions.
And I have also imposed a 25% tariff on foreign aluminum, copper, lumber, and steel, because if we don't have, as an example, steel and lots of other things, we don't have a military, and frankly, we just won't have a country very long.
It's time for copper to come home.
America and the world is hungry for copper. Giant Mining is the sponsor of today's video. Not only do they have their own copper, silver, and gold project in Nevada, but Giant Mining recorded its best ever drill intercepts in September 2024, with additional great results having occurred in the past few weeks. Nevada, where Giant Mining's copper project is situated, has constantly ranked among the top mining jurisdictions in the world, which is why I'm bringing this company to your attention. Giant Mining's balance sheet is now fully funded and is well positioned to accelerate its exploration efforts and potentially capitalize on emerging copper market opportunities. The share price is down by 50% since early February due to market turmoil, so it's 50% cheaper than what it was just a few months ago. Giant Mining, they own the Majuba Hill copper project, a past producing mine. In the past 4 years, management and the company's geologists have actually expanded the copper deposits, and this past September, Giant Mining hit their best ever drill hole. Historic underground mines at the Majuba Hill project produced copper, tin, and silver from the early 1900s to the 1950s, including 2.8 million pounds of copper, 184,000 ounces of silver, and 5,800 ounces of gold. The infrastructure is ready, the access roads, the power supply, the transportation, and the rest, so do your homework on Giant Mining, ticker BFGFF. Now, back to China's military. The Chinese military is one that, let's say, you don't necessarily want to mess with. The so-called Red Army is the largest military in the world in sheer numbers with 2 million active personnel. They also have the biggest navy by number of warships. In China, all high school and university students are required to undergo military training, complete drills, marching, and get lectures on patriotism. Unlike in the USA, this is non-optional. Also, China has reportedly built thousands of kilometers of underground tunnels to hide its nuclear missile stockpiles, known as the Underground Great Wall. The army itself has a deep history of rugged warfare where they marched 9,000 k's across mountains, rivers, and swamps to evade nationalist forces, forging their own weapons and growing their food in remote bases. Eventually, the CCP, of course, as we know, won the war against nationalist forces. While this was 80 years ago, the knowledge is still probably there. If you compare China's army to the USA, many people think that the Americans will just knock them out of the park, but it's closer than you think. China has more active personnel, 2 million versus 1.4 million people. They have extra ground forces, 975,000 troops versus 475,000. The USA has slightly more tanks, 6,000 versus 5,000, and the American ones are also known to be more modern. Aircraft, the USA wins again, much more, 13,000 versus 3,300. Warships, however, China wins 370 versus 300. And if you go through the numbers, I would say that the USA wins overall on average, but it's definitely not by the margin that you would initially think. Also, China are not allocating right now the same amount of resources to their military as the USA is. But if things get heated, they can easily increase their budget. Now, whether the Chinese are using the money that they get from owning American debt to fund their military, I cannot find any evidence of this. It's something that probably only the high-ranking officials of the Chinese Communist Party know. And of course, if they are using this money for military purposes, they wouldn't go screaming to the world about it. Even the worst of diplomats would not let that slip. If we go to their budget, they spend 1.7 trillion yuan or $250 billion on military. At least that's according to the State Council of China. If you remember from earlier on, we worked out that they currently receive about $24 billion in yearly interest payments from US taxpayers taxpayers. So just the interest payments, which they basically get for free, would fund about 1/10 of China's army if they were to use this money for the army. But are they currently using this for their Red Army, or are they simply using it to build the country's infrastructure? I don't know if any of you have been to China recently, but please go take a visit to a place like Shenzhen and your mind will be blown just how impressive the buildings they have there, the technology they've developed. You'll be shocked. How have they built something so impressive in just over the last 15 or so years? Well, that certainly comes from a range of factors, but it doesn't hurt in getting $24 billion in passive income for free from the US government, aka the US taxpayer.